So some of you don't know or may not know, Kathy had mentioned, Reverend Divine, who's our staff minister here, her father transitioned last night. And she spoke last Sunday about an amazing experience she had with him last Saturday in this whole transition experience. And she's very profoundly awakened to the compassion that she has. And it reminded me, of course, with all of this, of my own father's passing. So my dad passed away about five and a half years ago now. And what I noticed when I was going through that experience is I had so much pain inside my body. I didn't know how anybody could live through that kind of experience. Like, I couldn't fathom how I could live through the pain and the sadness that I was experiencing. And yet I knew I'd wake up the next day and I'd be breathing and I'd be crying and I would walk through it. And I know not everybody's experience is the same as mine, but I know that a lot of people, when they lose their parents, there's nothing that can really describe it. And somebody told me it's kind of like a club that nobody wants to belong to, but they get it when they're in it. You know, like you understand. So I want to dedicate this service to Samuel Young, who is Divine's father, and also my father, Edward DeVar Shire, honoring the men in our lives. For me, my father was an inspirational man. He was a great man. And it also, his transition gave me something. It was a gift, and I can see that now, but I did not see it then at all. But what it gave me was the gift of compassion in a way that I could have never understood before. I was going through ministerial school at the time, and my father passed away unexpectedly. He was 61 years old, and I was not there. I was here in California. He was living in New Mexico, and I was very surprised. He had a very rare form of cancer called duodenal cancer, and they found it, a week before he transitioned. I mean, it was really, really quick. So at the time, I didn't understand. I thought, why is this happening to me? Like, why now? I'm so young. This isn't fair. And what I recognize is that as a minister, I can't really get it until I've gotten it, I can really understand what people are going through now in a way that I never would have known. It cracked my heart wide open in a way that I can't even describe. It's opened me to compassion at a deeper level than I've ever experienced before. And so that's what we're talking about this month. The month of March is our month of compassion. And I read this quote by Chip Brogden, I don't really know how it's pronounced. But he said, it's not a question of God allowing or not allowing things to happen. It is a part of living. Some things we do to ourselves, other things we do to each other. Our Father knows about every bird which falls to the ground, but he does not prevent it from falling. What are we to learn from this? That our response to what happens is more important than what happens. Here's the mystery. One man's experience drives him to curse God, while another man's identical experience drives him to bless God. Your response to what happens is more important than what happens. And I thought that was really appropriate for this month of awakening ourselves up, taking the leap into compassion into ways that we've never even experienced it before. I read a story about a college student named Daniel Nguyen. And he started this organization called Operation Compassion. And how he started it is he said that he's just a regular college guy, and he was riding on the bus to his college classes every day, and there was a panhandler that was on the bus every day, panhandling from everybody on the bus. And he would always kind of make sure he was not sitting next to an open seat, and he put his earbuds in, and he'd play his music really loud, and he'd kind of give off the vibe of like, don't get near me. And one day he sat down, and there was a seat that was vacant next to him, and he noticed the guy, the panhandler, came and sat down next to him, and he put his earbuds in, and he turned his music like extra loud, and he was like rocking, and the panhandler just poked him, and he pretended he didn't notice. He's like, go away, go away, go away, go away. And the guy kind of poked him again, and so he was like, okay. And he took his earbuds off, and he's like, what do you want? And the guy asked him for some money. And at first he said, no, I don't have any money to give you. And then he started talking to the guy, and he found out his name was Reggie, and he rides the bus all the time, and he found out a little bit more about him. And so he said, so Reggie, what are you going to do with the money if I gave you some money? And Reggie said, are you a cop? And he said, no, I'm a college student. And Reggie said, okay, then I'll tell you. I go every day and I panhandle it, and then I donate it to homeless youth. There's an organization down the street that I give the money to. And Daniel said, I don't really believe him. I don't really believe him. And he thought, this is pretty much what anybody else would think. Most people wouldn't believe him. So he went ahead and gave the guy $1, and he watched him as he left the bus, and he secretly tracked him. He followed him. And the guy went into this building. He was there for a while. He came out and he left. And so he kind of like snuck over, and he went into the building. And lo and behold, it was a building for homeless youth. And he talked to the receptionist. He said, hey, do you know Reggie? And the lady said, oh, Reginald? And he said, yeah. And she said, you mean that guy, that picture on the wall? And he turns around, and the picture was of Reggie, the guy he met in the bus. And he said, yeah, that guy. She said, he's our biggest donor to this organization. And something stirred in this college student. Something transformed him. And he thought, I'm just like everybody else. And I made all these assumptions just like everybody else about this guy. And what is this guy doing? He's a homeless man, and he's this organization's biggest donor. His generosity in his heart is way bigger than I could imagine. And I judged him. And so he decided to start an organization called Operation Compassion. And he made a mission, this was in 2012, he did a mission that for 100 days, he was going to meet 100 different people, regular, everyday people, and find out more about them, and then share their story. And so he went and he did a little blog, and he met all kinds of people. He met the burger counter guy, the guy who flipped his burgers at the student union, and he met the guy who was selling newspapers at his Safeway, and he met somebody else on the bus, and he ended up meeting a Holocaust survivor. He ended up meeting another homeless person who was going to commit suicide, but then there was this person who came to them and was selling newspapers and said that she could have a life for herself, and gave her back her life with the opportunity to sell some newspapers and make some money and get her life back off the ground. So he found all of these people, and they were in everyday situations. And he realized that if he opened his heart up to humans, to treating humans like humans, that something changed within him. And he knew that this was deep compassion. He said that his mentor told him this: the purpose of life is to find your gifts. The meaning of life is to give your gift away to others. And I was studying this TED Talk by Joan Halifax. If you don't know who she is, she became really famous in the 60s. She was doing experiments with LSD on dying patients to see if those kinds of drugs could open somebody up and to having a different experience. Instead of being afraid of dying, that they were open to a larger idea in life. So she became really famous in the 60s. But as it turns out, as she's grown in the world, she's become an advocate for the dying. And she's traveled all over the world, and she's made it her mission to be at as many people's sides as possible when they're in the midst of transition. And so she was in India in a place, I forgot what she called it, but it was basically a place for the dying. It was just a bunch of people they had nothing. They didn't have any family or friends, and they were there in this, high populated area in order to take their last days. And she said she saw these young ladies who were taking care of these dying people, and they were caring for them as if they were their mother or their brother. They were caring for them with so much care and compassion that she was so moved that people could just be like this. And she knew that these young ladies who haven't necessarily experienced all of this tragedy and difficulty, somehow there was something inside of them where they were willing to step into a greater sense of humanity, a greater sense of being. And she determined that compassion is comprised of two components. One is the capacity to see clearly into suffering. Basically saying, I'm not separate from this suffering. And we seek to transform the suffering into a different experience. And she said the next component is not being attached to the outcome. And knowing that compassion is an inherent human quality. Everybody has it within them. But the seeds have to be watered. And sometimes people's seeds aren't watered, and so they don't get it. But it's still within them. Everybody has the capacity to be compassionate. She said that the opposite of compassion is pity, or moral outrage, or fear. She said that fear and terror immobilize compassion. And if you think about it, and you think about people being afraid of somebody being violent towards them, people being afraid of walking down the street if there's going to be a bomb, people being afraid, they react not from a sense of compassion, but a sense of closed offness. And the invitation is to open us up to a greater sense of being with our fellow human beings. And that's not always easy, especially when we've had tragedy, or we've had difficulty, or we've had somebody who wants to create violence on another do that to us, or somebody we love. And when that happens, we oftentimes close ourselves up. And so I'm going to invite you to be willing to open your heart up even if you've been hurt. Open your heart up to a greater way, because the rewards are way greater than the pain you might experience. Joan Halifax said that there were some studies done, scientific studies, and a person who's cultivating compassion may feel suffering more than others, but they return to a baseline of being happy a lot sooner than other people. A person who experiences compassion, the actual act of compassion hooks up different neurons in your brain in new ways. And so it can actually bring you to think in a new way, behave in a new way, just by having that compassionate and open heart. She said that compassion enhances our immune system. So the more that we're open to those who are suffering, the more we feel compassion for them, the stronger our own immune system is. I was in a Practitioner 2 class with Kathy and Brunessa, and Kathy had a saying, she said, that she heard, and she said it was about this woman, and the woman's carrying a big load up a mountain, and it's getting heavier and heavier, and she's saying, please God, make my load lighter, and it just doesn't get any lighter. And it just is so difficult for her to go up this hill. And all of a sudden, an idea comes to her, and she said, please God, make my back stronger. Yeah, and it was easier for her to carry her load. There's a Buddhism saying that says we must have a strong back and a soft front. Yeah. So the strong back to uphold yourself in difficult situations, but a soft heart to be open to the world. Kristen Neff is an associate professor in human development and culture. And she did a study, and her study was about self-esteem. And she realized there's something a little off in this world, especially in America, about the self-esteem movement, that we often think of self-esteem as a very positive thing, but a lot of people who we portray as having a positive self-esteem actually do not behave in a positive way. They actually take it on more like an ego thing. So she decided that maybe there should be a new movement going on, the movement of self-compassion, where if a person has high self-esteem here in American culture, it usually means that you have to be above average. Basically, it means you have to be above everybody else. Like if I told you, Kathy, you're so average. Who wants to hear that? Nobody, right? Nobody wants to be average. We all want to be above average. But if we're all above average, well, where does that make everybody else? It makes us feel like we're above everybody else. So what if, instead of creating a self-esteem, we created self-compassion? You know, a lot of people realize that there's a lot of bullying that's going on in our schools these days. And although we're teaching kids to be powerful, to take on their self, sometimes we're teaching them to do it in a way that causes them to feel like I'm better than other people. And it's good to feel great about yourself. It's good to take on the qualities and know, because it's true. Each and every one of you in this room is a person that was created in the image of the divine. The spirit, the universe, had a perfect idea for a holy creation, and it showed up as you. It showed up as a unique, joyful giver. It showed up as somebody who has gifts to share in the world. And it's great. It is so imperative that we take that on. But we take it on in a way that doesn't say that my gifts are better than your gifts. We take it on in a way of saying, I love my gifts and I love your gifts. It's not a this or this, it's a this and this situation. So Kristen Neff stated that there's 3 ways that we can cultivate self-compassion. The first way is by treating ourselves with kindness. So Bruce was talking today about the monkey mind, the words in your head. We were talking at our planning retreat for Sister Spirit about the fact that we have a judge in our head and we have a victim in our head. And sometimes we listen to the judge, and that's the one judging us because we want to be better than others, right? And then sometimes we have the victim, and this is the one that says, why is this happening to me? Why does this always happen to me, right? So everybody has those two. Am I right? I mean, am I the only one? Okay. All right, so we all have these 2 characters in our head, but there's a third character, and it's the voice of truth. It's the center and the core of our being. And so we can understand that we have these characters, but can we hold them with love? That's the question. Can we hold them with love? So on a bad day, we often treat ourselves badly. Instead, let's try and treat ourselves like we would treat our best friend. Treat somebody that we love. If we're having a bad day, let's step into that idea. Kristen talks about the fact that she has a child with autism, and she was going to England. She was on a flight to England, and her son was 4 years old, and he basically has tantrums randomly. And there, you know, because he has autism, she doesn't know what the trigger is. and why it happens. Like, she's still trying to figure that out with her child. And so she was on this plane to England, and her child had this terrible tantrum. And I mean, he was screaming and yelling, and they're on a plane. And she can't maintain him because he doesn't have the skills to understand. And so she knows, she's standing there, and she thought, well, I'll take him to the bathroom because maybe then he can scream and yell in the bathroom so I'm not disrupting everybody. So she walks up to the bathroom in the plane, and lo and behold, it's occupied. So there she is, standing there with a screaming, child that's just making the biggest racket. People are looking at her with disgraceful faces, and they're, why can't you contain your child kind of things. And she's sitting there so embarrassed. And she realizes, I need to take this moment and practice self-compassion. And so she looks inside of herself, and she says, I know this is a difficult situation, and I love you anyway. You're doing a great job. You're doing the best you can as a parent. And I love and appreciate you, especially in this difficult situation. So she treated herself with self-compassion in a way that nobody else could because they didn't understand. They didn't know. The second thing she said that we can use for self-compassion is common humanity. When we have self-esteem, we talk about how am I different than others. But when we utilize self-compassion, it's how am I the same as others. Feeling of separate from others is kind of what gets us in trouble. So when we can talk about the common ground between us, that's where we can cultivate compassion and a loving experience. The third thing is mindfulness, and that's being with what is in the present moment. Just being with it. Accepting the fact that we're suffering, accepting the fact that somebody else is suffering, and just being with it. If we can do this, we can step into a different experience of life. So I'm going to ask you, when did you last have a human conversation with somebody you didn't know? I'd like you to take it on this week. Take it on. Take on a new person. Maybe it's a homeless person. Maybe it's somebody that you're standing next to in line. It doesn't matter. Just strike up a conversation with them. Find out how their day is and listen to them with an open heart and open ears. And I wonder, are you really sharing your gifts with the world? A lot of us have these gifts, like the gift of music, and they're still contained within our hearts and our bodies and souls because we're too afraid to share them. But this is a life that's meant to live. The gifts are yours to share. They're not a gift until you share it. And so I invite you to step into the gifts that you have, the unique and special gifts that you have, because nobody else can do it like you can. And my third question is, are you willing to love yourself through your challenges? If you notice any challenges coming up this week, ask yourself, am I willing to practice self-compassion? Am I willing to take myself on, love myself like I deserve to be loved? Because I can promise you, you're worth it. And I love you all. Oh, thank you. So let's pray. Knowing that this life is a life filled with things that we see sometimes as trials and tribulations. But truly, the infinite one, God, the universe, the creator of all, created everything from the dark night of the soul to the awakening and the bright daylight, the beauty of the beach. And I know in this amazing transition that in these times of challenge and the times of joy, that there's some commonality between all of that. And that commonality is the commonality of love. And so I know and claim that this love that is everywhere present, I call it forth in my life, knowing that I tap into the love that I am in a new and deeper way. That I'm open to seeing and feeling with that loving, open heart in a way that I've never done before. And as I claim this for myself, I claim this for each and every person here and each and every person who hears this on the internet or on YouTube. Knowing that we are all connected in a way that we may not even understand. And so I know and claim that I'm opened up to this light in a new way. Knowing that a burden shared is a burden halved. And so I welcome the opportunities to step into this way of being, this compassionate living, this mindfulness, knowing that I share my gifts with the world. I share them, knowing that the world wants who I am. And whenever I trip and I fall over in ways that I can't even imagine, that I know that there's something inside of me that is beyond the beyond, that loves me exactly as I am. And so I tap into that, knowing that I am loved, knowing that I'm cherished, knowing that I'm part of something greater, more magnificent than I can ever imagine. And I welcome that. And so I let this word go into that infinite mind, into the universe, allowing the great creator of all to fill me up with light and love. Allowing myself to be a vessel for compassion in the world. I welcome it. I celebrate it. I embody it, and I am it. And as I claim this for me, I claim it for each and every person here, present or not. Thank you, life. I am humbled. I am honored. I am grateful to be here. And so it is.